Before there was much knowledge of COVID-19, it was already far too difficult for Americans to save for a dignified retirement. According to the National Institute on Retirement Security, as of 2018, more than 100 million working-age Americans had no pension and no retirement assets. The pandemic economic crash made saving even harder. A recent survey on the impact of the pandemic conducted by AARP found that among those fortunate enough to have retirement accounts, nearly a quarter had to dip into their savings or quit contributing altogether just to pay the bills. Taken together, that means a sizable majority of American workers fall into one of two camps. Either they can't afford to save at all, or they have hardly any financial cushion when times get tough. Now, more recently, Americans were reminded about long-running retirement ripoffs by ultra-wealthy individuals advised by the priciest accountants and lawyers. This really wasn't new in a literal sense, because at our request, the General Accounting Office, years and years ago, put together an extensive report outlining the abuses. Now, one of these reports that Americans learned about included details on a multi-billion-dollar IRA. And certainly, if you're somebody who is scrimping and trying to save during that pandemic, say you're a teacher or a restaurant manager who didn't have a rainy day fund, and you didn't have anything, and you read about these well-fed retirement accounts, what it signaled just in the last few months is another case of double standard economics. The system doesn't do nearly enough to help working people of modest means get ahead, but individuals at the very top, at the very, very top, are able to game the rules to get ahead and basically abuse taxpayer-subsidized accounts with pricey accountants and lawyers. So this increases the already existing inequality between retirement haves and have-nots to an extreme level. And I want to make it clear, Senator Crapo has probably heard this more times than he would wish. I want economic policies that give everybody in America the chance to get ahead, not one that promotes, as we're going to see, retirement haves and have-nots. The Finance Committee, Senator Crapo and I were talking about this as a bipartisan tradition when it comes to helping Americans save, and we're going to continue that tradition in the months ahead. This has been certainly a polarized Congress, but make no mistake about it, this committee is going to come together as it relates to promoting savings. So let me tick off a few proposals that I think will help. First, last week with Senator Bennett, Senator Casey, and Senator Menendez, I introduced the Encouraging Americans to Save Act to get more help to the working folks who need it so badly. Under that proposal, the credit would be opened up to millions of Americans with modest incomes who never had access before. It would become a matching contribution that would go directly into a retirement account. It's got the potential to be a game changer for folks in Oregon and all across the country who don't have the ability, as I said, to save much or anything at all. Second, our tax code ought to help young people get started saving earlier in their careers. Too many Americans are unable to save at work because they're paying off mountains of student loan debt. And let me draw the picture of the person I'm concerned about. Say you have a young person from a community of color where nobody's had a chance to go to college, and they're the first generation that did. And they go out and they get that exciting new job, say with a tech company, a manufacturer, and the company has a terrific retirement package, but the worker has got to match what the employer puts in. So they have eyeballs, they're up to their eyeballs in student debt, and so they can't take advantage of it. So my retirement parity for student loans legislation says workers who make student loan payments would qualify to get a matching payment from their employer into a retirement savings plan like a 401k. their student loans shrink and their nest egg grows under what we're talking about. That's my view of a savings win-win, and it's long overdue. Third, the committee ought to make it easier for people to move their retirement accounts, continue saving when they change jobs. And this is another area Senator Crapo and I have talked about, because if you look at the number of people who change their jobs by the time they're 40, they care enormously about portability. And in 2021, I think it's fair to say very few people stay with an employer for their whole career. And the fact is, given that, it shouldn't be such a pain in the neck to move your retirement savings. Many Americans just give up, faced with all the complexity and hassle, cash out their savings, losing out on a whole lot of earnings that would build up over time. These rules essentially penalize Americans for routine job changes in the modern economy. So the system ought to change. Even on this committee, back when we were having the debate in 2009, we all said we wanted to make health coverage more portable. Well, we still got more to do on that, but this committee has a chance to make retirement savings more portable, and I'm going to work closely with Senator Crapo to do it. Finally, it's long past time to crack down on the mega IRAs, which, as I held up in this very long GAO report, was documented years ago. The fact is, from the beginning, IRAs, and you go back and read the documents, Republicans and Democrats said IRAs were to promote retirement security for the typical American family. They weren't meant to become another tax dodge for billionaires. And the GAO, as we indicated in their landmark study that we requested, essentially looked at it a number of years back. GAO found then that nearly 8,000 taxpayers had aggregate IRA account balances in excess of $5 million. These massive IRAs have only gotten bigger and more prevalent. Yesterday, the Joint Committee on Taxation gave me data, and so everybody should know this. It was lawfully obtained, okay? Lawfully obtained. And just basically shows GAO was right when we asked them to do it in 2014, and the problem is even greater. In 2019, almost 25,000 taxpayers had aggregate IRA account balances of over $5 million. 497 of those taxpayers had aggregate IRA accounts of over $25 million, with an average aggregate account balance of over $150 million each. It's clearly a tax loophole that ought to be closed. Hope we'll have bipartisan support for that. So, we got a lot to talk about. I expect, and Senator Crapo and I have talked about this, we'll have a lot of ideas coming in from both sides of the aisle. And that's what public service is supposed to be about, is have big, important issues like retirement savings, which I started caring about years ago when I was director of the Gray Panthers at home in Oregon, had a full head of hair and rugged good looks. My friend Tobias, who'll get introduced in a minute, remembers some of those pictures. We belonged to the Tall Guys Caucus. So I've had a long-standing interest in this. And it's not about Democrats and Republicans. It's about good policy, helping people, and giving everybody in America the chance to get ahead. So we feel strongly about it, and look forward to the remarks of my friend from Idaho.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I deeply appreciate your holding this important bipartisan hearing. Private retirement savings and retirement security are issues in the Finance Committee's jurisdiction that have a history of bipartisan cooperation, and I expect this time will be no different. The purpose of this hearing is to hear testimony on how we can build on that bipartisan track record. In 2015, under then Chairman Hatch, I co-chaired the Finance Committee's Savings and Investment Tax Working Group with Senator Brown. That working group examined a host of proposals to increase access to retirement plans, to increase participation in plans, and to preserve retirement savings. Many of the findings from the working group, including open multiple employer plans and provisions to help long-term part-time workers, were precursors to RISA and ultimately the Secure Act, which became law in December 2019. At the same time, retirement savings were growing and the economy was booming following the pro-growth, pro-worker policies enacted as part of the 2017 tax law reform. However, the pandemic put a great deal of economic stress on workers and retirees, and some had no choice but to withdraw money from their retirement accounts to make ends meet. As the economy continues to bounce back, we have a chance to build on the success of the Secure Act in a bipartisan way. House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Neal and Ranking Member Brady have already started the process. In the Senate, we are also making significant progress on this issue, thanks to the leadership of Senator Portman and Senator Cardin. Other members, both those who sit on this committee and those who do not, have been working in a bipartisan way on retirement proposals, which, as Senator Wyden has indicated, we expect we will hear more about today and will be coming to us as we put together the legislation that we expect to put together. The ideas range, the range of ideas put forth to improve the retirement system are all important, but my focus is on 3 points that are the most pressing for Idahoans and Americans across the country. First and foremost, Congress should enact policies that encourage workers to save so that they can enjoy retirement. One survey conducted by the Department of Labor found that while 71% of civilian workers had access to retirement benefits, the participation rate for that same group was only 55%. This survey was conducted only months after the Secure Act was enacted, so I will be interested to see updated studies and surveys in the future. But the concern remains about whether enough workers are saving for retirement. Second, I frequently hear from small business owners in Idaho who tell me how expensive and cumbersome the rules are to offer their employees a retirement plan. These employers want to provide retirement benefits, but it's just not economically feasible. I'm interested in hearing about what Congress can do to make it easier and cheaper for the smallest businesses to offer retirement plans for their employees. Third, our economy is constantly evolving. People are working longer, workers are changing jobs more often, and the number of gig workers is on the rise. Our retirement system must adapt with this changing landscape so that every worker has a chance to save for a secure retirement. There is no better time for the Finance Committee to consider further retirement legislation that will meet these needs. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to working with you and all the members of this committee as we consider a so-called Secure 2.0 package. And to our panel of witnesses, I appreciate your willingness to share your expertise with us this morning. And I look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank my colleague. We've got two senators on our side who have a longstanding interest in retirement security. And as I was speaking, Senator Cardin came in, and he has been working in these savings precincts for decades, and he deserves an enormous amount of credit for saying years ago, this was an area where Congress ought to get out beyond the partisan back and forth, and he's teamed up with Republicans repeatedly, and we appreciate it. The four witnesses are going to be Aaliyah Robinson, Senior Vice President for Retirement and Compensation Policy for the ERISA Industry Committee. They focus on employee benefit issues for employers. She previously handled these issues for the Chamber of Commerce. We are glad you're here, ma'am. The second witness will be Mr. Brian Graff, the Chief Executive Officer of the American Retirement Association. It's an organization that represents a wide range of retirement professionals. If I listed them all, we would be here till breakfast, but I would like to note that they have a number of members from Oregon, and so we're very glad you're here. The third witness, David Sertner, is with the American Association of Retired Persons. We Gray Panthers teamed up with them a long, long time ago. They do advocacy work for Americans age 50 and older, and we're glad you're here. And our fourth witness is a longtime friend and professional colleague, the Honorable Tobias Reed. He's the State Treasurer of Oregon. His office is responsible for several savings programs for Oregonians. And he's really been a pioneer in this field, and we're very proud of our state. We've got a program called Oregon Saves, college savings plans established under the federal tax code, a savings account established under the federal tax code for individuals with disabilities. So Ms. Robinson, we welcome you. For all of you, we'll make your prepared remarks a part of the record. If you'd like to take maybe 5 minutes or so to summarize your comments. It's going to be a hectic day here in the Senate, as you might imagine, with the bipartisan efforts and what we're working on in our committee. So members will be coming in and out, and we welcome you, Ms. Robinson. Please go ahead.
Thank you and good morning. Chairman Wyden, Ranking Member Crapo, excuse me, members of the Senate Finance Committee and others in attendance. I am pleased to testify on behalf of the ERISA Industry Committee, otherwise known as ERIC, on how Congress can continue to build bipartisan legislation to help American workers save for retirement. I am Aaliyah Robinson, Senior Vice President for Retirement and Compensation Policy at ERIC. ERIC has a unique voice as the only national association that advocates exclusively for large employers on health, retirement, and compensation policies at the federal, state, and local levels. Why do we offer a unique voice? Because we speak exclusively for large companies in their role as benefit plan sponsors. Our smallest member company has over 10,000 employees, and each operates in multiple states. As a matter of fact, most of our member companies operate in every state. This can create compliance and logistical challenges that are not faced by other employers. More importantly, our member companies are at the forefront of benefit policies. They are driving innovative benefit designs and initiatives that often provide the blueprint for future legislative policies. We are pleased you want to help, and we have specific recommendations for action. ERIC appreciates the efforts of Congress and this committee in particular, as was noted, to provide much-needed updates to retirement plan design and operation in the SECURE Act, and to address COVID-19 related concerns in the CARES Act and most recently in the American Rescue Plan Act. As our economy continues to rebuild, we appreciate efforts to increase retirement security, particularly after the financial strain suffered by many workers and participants. Since all ERIC member companies offer retirement benefits to their employees, our focus is not on coverage, but on increasing savings opportunities for plan participants and maximizing resources by decreasing administrative burdens. This morning, I will highlight a few of our recommendations, but many more are detailed in my written testimony. So let's start with student loan assistance. ERIC supports treating student loan payments as elective deferrals for the purpose of employer matching contributions, as originally proposed by Chairman Wyden and included in the Bipartisan Retirement Savings and Security Act introduced by
Ms.
Senators.
Robinson, can I just freeze that? And we're not going to do this except on this point, but student parity is so important to help all these students digging out from the debt. What this means is the hundreds of employers that you all represent are going to be supportive of this concept.
Yes.
Great. Excuse me for interrupting.
Not at all. And to that point, employers do not want their workers to miss out on matching contributions because they are repaying their student loan debt. So we support these efforts to treat student loan payments as salary reduction contributions. Our next recommendation is also meant to address comprehensive financial strains that workers face. ERIC believes that allowing for emergency savings accounts as part of retirement savings plans is critical to strengthening the connection between short-term financial concerns and adequate savings for retirements. As such, ERIC supports the bipartisan Enhancing Emergency and Retirement Savings Act of 2021, introduced by Senators Langford and Bennett. As I mentioned, ERIC member companies are on the forefront of benefit and plan design. One area where our member companies would like to see innovation is in the definition of a highly compensated employee. The purpose of the non-discrimination rules is to ensure that highly compensated employees who are in decision-making positions are incentivized to provide proportional benefits for non-highly compensated employees. And I should note, the definition of a highly compensated employee statutorily is about $130,000 per year, so we're not talking about billionaires and millionaires. Many industries have highly paid new hires and flat payment structures or operate in locations where the cost of living is high, so many employees are inappropriately treated as highly compensated employees, even though they do not have decision-making authority. This limits their ability to save, especially at the crucial early stages of their careers. Therefore, ERIC proposes that an employer be permitted to limit the employees considered highly compensated employees to the top 10% group of employees by compensation. In addition to increasing savings opportunities, ERIC believes it is equally important to reduce administrative burdens. Due to the size of ERIC member companies, logistical issues can be significant and costly, such as the need to prepare and send required notices. ERIC greatly supports the provision in the Retirement Security and Savings Act that would consolidate and simplify existing ERISA and tax reports, notices, and disclosures. However, simplifying and consolidating the notice requirements addresses only one part of the burden. A crucial factor is the distribution of notices and disclosures. Therefore, we are very supportive of changes made by the Department of Labor to allow plan sponsors to use electronic delivery as the default option for providing retirement plan notices. And we encourage Congress to continue this flexibility for plan sponsors. My final point is to urge you to avoid unnecessary and harmful increases in single employer PBGC premiums. And we look forward to working with you on the Bipartisan Pension and Budget Integrity Act, which has been introduced in previous Congresses. Eric applauds the leadership of this committee in recognizing the continued need to focus on retirement security, and we look forward to continuing to work with you to advance these and other measures to further promote retirement security for Americans.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson, and I'm sure we're going to talk to you and ERISA often. Okay, Mr. Graff, next.
Thank you, Chairman Wyden, Ranking Member Crapo, and the other members of the committee for holding this hearing on improving our nation's retirement plan system. My name is Brian Graff. I'm the CEO of the American Retirement Association. The ARA's 30,000 members and the organizations they are affiliated with support 95% of all the defined contribution plans like 401ks in the U.S. The workplace retirement plan system has been a success for those who have access. With almost $10 trillion in assets, these plans provide long-term economic growth and build financial security for the middle class. Nearly 2/3 of participants in 401ks earn less than $100,000 a year. 1/3 make less than $50,000. For moderate income workers, the gateway to a comfortable retirement is being covered by a workplace retirement plan. Data shows moderate income workers are 12 times more likely to save for retirement if they have access to some type of workplace retirement savings program. Despite these results, far too many Americans still lack access to a retirement plan at work. This retirement plan coverage gap and the corresponding lack of retirement savings is particularly pronounced in the Black and Latinx communities. 52% of Black Americans and 68% of Latinx Americans do not currently have access to a workplace retirement plan. By contrast, only 40% of white Americans lack access. As a result, 56% of Black families and 2/3 of Latinx families have zero retirement savings compared with 35% of white families. Expanding coverage with auto-enrollment is the key to solving this problem. Data shows that when moderate income workers are auto-enrolled in a workplace plan, there is no, let me repeat, no racial disparity in retirement savings participation, with Black, Latinx, and white Americans all at about 80%. In recent years, state governments have taken steps to close the retirement plan coverage gap with the enactment of auto IRA programs. The key policy feature of these programs is a requirement that businesses over a certain size provide access to some type of retirement plan to their employees. To date, 10 states have enacted such programs, with Oregon being the first. ARA applauds the success of these programs, but believes a federal policy would better assure the retirement plan coverage gap can be addressed consistently throughout the entire country. Senator Whitehouse has introduced the Automatic Ira Act that would create a national requirement for businesses with 10 or more employees to adopt a retirement plan. Similar legislation has been introduced by House Ways and Means Chairman Neal with a tax credit to fully cover any employer costs. We believe these proposals would significantly close the retirement plan coverage gap by leveraging the existing private retirement plan system while imposing practically no burden on employers. ARA also supports Chairman Wyden's Encouraging Americans to Save Act, which is also a key provision in Senator Cardin's and Senator Portman's Bipartisan Retirement Security and Savings Act. The bill incentivizes and supplements the retirement savings of moderate-income workers by expanding and enhancing the existing Savers Credit, turning it into a government matching contribution of up to $1,000 a year for workers who save in a retirement account. The bill also expands eligibility for the new Savers Match, making the full 50% match available to families earning up to $65,000. With these increased income thresholds, over 120 million American workers would now be eligible for the new Savers Match incentive for retirement savings. This includes millions of new gig workers in this country, as well as government workers like public school teachers who currently are not eligible for matching contributions. Closing the retirement plan coverage gap and directly contributing to and incentivizing the retirement savings of moderate income workers would have an amazing impact. Estimates show the enactment of the combination of the Auto IRA Act and the Encouraging Americans to Save Act would create 51 million new retirement savers and over $6 trillion in new savings over the next 10 years. Nearly all, 98% of these new savers, earn less than $100,000 a year. These two proposals would also greatly benefit the Black and Latinx communities, creating over 14 million new Black and Latinx retirement savers. Retirement savings is accumulated wealth, which leads to generational wealth and is an essential piece to closing the racial wealth gap. Besides these two important policies, as discussed in more detail in my written testimony, ARA supports several other legislative proposals that would strengthen and expand the workplace retirement plan system. I encourage the Finance Committee and ultimately Congress to enact the Auto IRA Act, the Encouraging Americans to Save Act, and other proposals designed to expand access to workplace retirement plans. The 401k plan has been a success story. Now you can make it a story of diversity as well. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Graff, and I'm glad to have Mr. Sertner here. He's been someone who's given this committee a lot of counsel over the years. We welcome you, sir.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is David Sertner, and we thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of ARP on improving our retirement system. A secure retirement traditionally centered on the three-legged stool of employer-provided pensions, personal savings, and Social Security. Unfortunately, diminishing pensions and inadequate savings, plus longer life expectancies and higher health costs, has put a secure retirement out of reach for too many, requiring Social Security to play an even greater role in retirement. Social Security is already the principal source of income for over half of older households. Roughly one quarter, about 10 million people, depend on Social Security for nearly all, 90% or more of their income. Social Security keeps approximately 15 million older Americans out of poverty and allows millions more to live without fear of outliving their income. But while Social Security is the base of income in retirement, more is needed. The dramatic switch from defined benefit plans to defined contribution plans over the past 40 years has important implications for retirement security. Employees are now responsible for whether and how much to save and must manage their retirement funds, even though most have little investment experience. Unfortunately, most workers are not saving enough. Of course, access to a plan is better than none at all, and only about half of all workers have access to a retirement plan at work. Congress has taken numerous steps to make retirement saving easier, including features such as automatic enrollment and default investments that have helped workers and increased savings. However, automatic features only help workers who have a retirement plan. Expanding coverage to the tens of millions of workers without coverage remains a high priority. At the state level, ARP is focused on passing what are called work and save programs, which provide employer-facilitated access to payroll deduction savings for workers who don't have a way to save for retirement at work. Such access helps address the coverage gap because workers are 15 times more likely to save for retirement simply through payroll deduction at work. State programs, as you will soon hear from my colleague in Oregon, have already shown much promise in increasing coverage and savings. In addition to state programs, federal policy should also further encourage automatic payroll deduction savings. ARP has been a longtime supporter of federal automatic Ira legislation, such as that proposed by Senator Whitehouse. ARP also supports legislation recently approved by the Ways and Means Committee, also introduced by Senators Cardin and Portman, known as Secure 2, which includes many important changes. The bill would improve coverage for the 27 million part-time workers who generally are not covered by retirement savings plans. This is especially important for older workers and caregivers who often shift to part-time work. This bill would automatically enroll workers in new retirement plans as well. Of particular importance, the House version of Secure 2 includes a requirement for an annual paper benefit statement, which ARP strongly supports. Plan participants, who generally prefer paper copies of important financial documents, should be provided statements in paper form unless they choose electronic delivery. Congress needs to ensure workers receive and can review their annual benefit statements, similar to Social Security and the Federal Employment Statement of Earned Benefits, to help employees better understand and better manage their plans. Ensuring workers receive an annual paper statement can be complemented by added electronic measures. Secure 2 would also establish a national lost and found office, also proposed by Senators Warren and Daines, to help workers locate retirement accounts with previous employers. This has become increasingly important as more workers change jobs several times over their careers. Secure 2 also makes improvements to the required minimum distribution rules, including exempting a threshold amount that will both simplify the rules and help preserve savings. ARP also supports separate efforts to improve the Savers Tax Credit, which again acts as a matching contribution for low and moderate income taxpayers who contribute to a retirement plan. Improvements to the credit, such as those recently proposed by Chairman Wyden and others, can encourage and increase retirement savings for those least able to save. We also must do more to protect retirement nest eggs. All tax-preferred retirement savings should be prudently invested with reasonable fees and without conflicts of interest. A uniform fiduciary standard should ensure that all financial professionals act in the sole interest of their customers when providing investment advice. ARP also urges Congress to discourage pre-retirement cash outs of retirement funds and instead encourage portability and stable lifetime income streams. We should work together to encourage asset preservation and to provide low-cost distribution and spend-down options that meet workers' and retirees' needs. Finally, ARP commends the Congress for enacting important legislation early this year to protect the earned benefits of millions of workers and retirees counting on multi-employer pensions. The legislative support was critical to protecting the benefits of at-risk workers and retirees who had worked hard, earned their benefits, and were put at risk through no fault of their own. Again, ARP would like to thank the committee for considering the challenges and needs for secure retirement and for the opportunity to share our policy views.
Batting cleanup, as is fitting for Oregonians, is Tobias Reed. And I want to again commend him for the terrific leadership that he's shown on these issues for a long, long time. Treasurer Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Crapo. It's good to see two senators from states that played an important role in my life, my home state and the state where I was raised. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about this important topic today. My name is Tobias Reed, and I have the honor of serving as state treasurer in Oregon. As state treasurer, I'm focused on promoting the financial security of all Oregonians. And in 2015, when I was a state representative, I sponsored the legislation that ultimately created the Oregon Retirement Savings Plan, which is now known as Oregon Saves. The state treasury is tasked with implementing that program, and I'm here to give you an update on our progress. Oregon created this first-in-the-nation state-based auto IRA program in response to the growing retirement savings crisis. And when we launched it in 2017, we saw approximately 1 million private sector workers in Oregon that did not have access to a retirement savings plan at work. And I'm happy to report to you today that more than 110,000 Oregonians have funded IRAs with Oregon Saves, and that collectively they've saved over $123 million. We know from the research conducted by AARP that people are more than 15 times more likely to save for retirement if there's an option to do so at work, and Oregon Saves is proving that out. As you've already heard and are likely already aware, this retirement savings crisis is particularly acute for people at the lower rungs of the economic ladder, and especially for women and people of color. This is one of the reasons that we are especially excited. In the past year, Oregon Saves added home care workers and personal support workers who provide home-based help and services to adults and children experiencing disabilities across Oregon. These workers are obviously doing critical jobs, and we're trying to help them prepare for retirement. The inclusion of these workers in Oregon Saves will not only make this a viable career for many more people, but it will reduce turnover and thereby improve care for seniors and people living with disabilities. It's a win for these important workers, a win for the people they serve, and a win for Oregon. As we were developing and rolling out Oregon Saves, we knew that it would be important to build a strong collaborative relationship with employers. We constructed the program to limit the responsibilities of the employer as much as possible, and we're always on the lookout for ways to further reduce the time that employers spend facilitating the program. The goal, of course, is to ensure that all Oregonians have access to the program without placing an undue burden on the small employers around the state. In fact, in testimony before the Oregon legislature, one employer group said, quote, "The Treasurer's Office has been incredible in the implementation of this program. They've tirelessly worked with us throughout the rules process to ensure that this is easy to implement. My clients are excited about it, and their employees are excited about it," end quote. That, by the way, is a credit to our team and our staff. From the beginning, these accounts were designed to provide workers with a continuity of savings that they otherwise wouldn't have, as their account moves with them from employer to employer. The Roth IRA structure also provides flexibility to the savers in managing their contributions enabling workers to leave their money in to grow, to move it elsewhere to another IRA, or even to withdraw it at any time without fee or penalty, a feature that we know has been especially important for people as they face some real challenges over the last year and a half. For instance, in the early days of the pandemic, as businesses were suddenly closing and people still had bills to pay and groceries to buy, we saw anecdotal evidence that people were able to use their accounts to provide much-needed financial stability. Many of these savers did tap their accounts, but we've seen many of them intentionally leave their accounts in place so that as their circumstances change, they'll be able to continue saving. Obviously, our roots are around retirement, but Oregon Saves has given us a way to engage with Oregonians about the range of savings needs that they confront, including saving for future education needs, for 529, and healthcare needs with an ABLE account. So looking forward, we are going to continue focusing on ways to make it easier for people to save for retirement and find ways to further reduce what we hope is already a minimal administrative burden for employers. But we're also especially supportive of your efforts to incentivize savings. The Encouraging Americans to Save Act, recently introduced by you, Chairman Wyden, would be a significant boost to Oregon Saves and other programs like it by offering the matching credit you've already heard about. And anything we can do to encourage people to save for their future will ultimately take pressure off of local, state, and federal budgets. We're also very excited about discussions here that point to a possible expansion of who is eligible to participate in the ABLE savings program led by Senator Casey and others. The success of Oregon Saves will have long-term positive implications for savers and for Oregon. Fewer Oregonians will enter into retirement in poverty, meaning less reliance on the social safety net, and people will have more dignity and choice as they age. Oregon Saves was designed to improve our business climate and meet the needs of workers from a variety of circumstances, ultimately increasing the financial stability of Oregonians. This is something we're very proud of as we get started, and we're also happy to say that this is just the start. So I appreciate this hearing, and I look very much forward to the discussion we'll have today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you all. I'm going to try and see if we can cover a fair amount of ground pretty quickly. Let me start with you, Mr. Graff. You gave everybody really a jaw-dropping statistic early on. I just want to make sure we get this right. You said combining our savings credit reforms with a national program like the one Mr. Reed is talking about, Oregon Saves, would result in over 50 million additional retirement savers and would add $6.2 trillion in retirement savings over a decade. So if I'm getting this right, and I want to make sure that we are, what you're saying is if you encourage non-savers to save and those with limited savings to save more, that can really be a lodestar for America's future with respect to retirement savings. Is that right?
Thank you. Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. It would have a tremendous impact on frankly, the potential for a comfortable retirement for tens of millions of Americans who currently don't have access. We know that getting access to the workplace as well as auto-enrollment, which is part of these proposals, works. It's just the data is absolutely positively clear. As I indicated in my oral testimony, the active participation rate for folks, regardless of color, is at around 80%. So these ideas have proven to work. We just want to scale them at a national level. And also, what we're excited about with respect to your proposal, the Encouraging Americans to Save Act, is that we think it'll bring even more savers who are currently not employed in a typical way, like gig workers, into the system, as well as for a lot of public employees like school teachers who currently don't get matching contributions. We're trying to employ basically the success of how 401ks in the private workplace have succeeded and apply it much more universally. And the data is very clear on this. This will work.
Good. And for the record, I want to make clear that this is the kind of principle Tobias Reed has been employing for Oregon. We appreciate it. Next question I want to pose to Ms. Robinson and Mr. Graff is on this issue of portability. And the fact is that when the worker takes a devastating financial hit when they cash out their retirement too early. The statistics are really pretty ugly. Research estimates $92 billion leaves the U.S. retirement system every year as a result of these early cash outs. Could you two just briefly offer up your thoughts? Because I want to get to one other area before we wrap up, because we're going to work with you on this for the long term. In fact, why don't we just start with you, Ms. Robinson?
Sure. We absolutely agree. Anything that helps participants keep track of their retirement accounts, keep them in the qualified plan system, we absolutely support. And in addition to the leakage problem you mentioned, we think it will also help with the missing participant problem, where participants either have a small account balance or spend a short amount of time with an employer, and the employer loses track of that participant. If there's an auto portability, then they are able to keep track of their accounts, and we think this will be helpful in a number of different areas.
All right, let's turn to this question of these abusively large IRAs, and I want to get your thoughts on this in particular, because, you know, it looks to me, and as we unpack this and we look at that GAO report of years ago, reinforced by the new data, is that when you have private equity and hedge fund traders and investment managers using these kinds of vehicles, it sure looks again like the double standard, because they have access to something that the typical American, this person who's not able to save at all or can't save enough, doesn't have access to. So my question to you, Mr. Graff, is do you think these massive accumulations are possible, largely as a result of the annual contribution limit to IRAs, whether Roth or traditional accounts? And what are your thoughts with respect to this? Because it sure looks to me like they're getting access to something that can explode in value and the typical American doesn't have access to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's important in this regard to distinguish between what are called rollover IRAs versus contributory IRAs. Rollover IRAs, which most Americans are familiar with, come from 401k plans, other defined contribution plans, and they were already subject to very strict limits and non-discrimination rules. What you're really referring to is more typically described as a contributory IRA. And I think the concern that you have usually stems from where venture capitalists contribute startup company stock into a contributory IRA. These are hard to value assets that typically are valued at zero or next to zero. And I can give you an example where you have a venture capitalist, they'll do 10 startups in a year, they'll put startup stock in 10 of these contributory IRAs, and if one of them hits in a big way, like you were talking about the data, you could have hundreds of millions and sometimes billions of dollars in this IRA. And the problem with these hard-to-value assets is that, one, they're hard to value, and two, the IRS really has practically no ability to enforce how to value them because there's typically no appraisal associated with it. So I think if you're concerned about this type of usage, this idea of putting the startup stock into an IRA really isn't a retirement tool. It's more of a tax planning tool.
And just so we're clear, what I'm talking about is not something that regularly the middle-class American has access to in terms of being able to find these kinds of investments that just explode in
No,
value.
you have to be a registered, sophisticated investor, and yes, you're absolutely right.
That's the point.
Great. That is the point.
Thank you very much. Senator Craig.
Thank you, Chairman Wyden. I'd like to go back to you, Ms. Robinson, and bring up a topic that hasn't really been focused on yet. I've long been a supporter of employee stock option plans, Esops. I've talked with middle-income workers in Idaho whose opportunity for saving for their retirement essentially has just been phenomenally successful through the ability to participate in an employee stock option plan. And the employers themselves are very, very interested in this. Do you believe that we should encourage the use of ESOPs, and if you do agree with that, could you comment on the role ESOPs play in the overall retirement system?
Yes, thank you. We are supportive of ESOPs generally, and also just employees, ESOPs, but also employee stock ownership generally. And it has been shown that there are benefits both to the business and to the participants themselves. There is greater employment stability. There's people are less likely to leave those jobs. There's less likely to be layoffs when there's employee ownership. They're less likely to offer other types of retirement plans. They're more likely to offer secondary retirement plans so that there's more opportunity for retirement savings. Participants in these plans often save more than they would in a 401k plan, and they have higher rates of return and less volatility than 401k plans. So they also cover younger employees and lower paid employees, more so than 401k plans. So we think these are a really good opportunity for companies who offer this kind of choice in their retirement savings.
Well, thank you. And I agree with that perspective. I hope we'll not lose sight of that as we move forward in this important arena. Mr. Sertner, according to a 2019 survey conducted by your organization and the Ad Council of moderate income adults in their 40s and 50s, roughly 47% of the respondents identified retirement as being in their top 3 savings priorities. While this was just one survey, we can probably all agree that we want that statistic to be higher. And setting aside for a moment the proposed changes to the Savers Credit, can you speak about other policies that would incentivize and encourage workers to save for retirement?
I think, first of all, we're talking about a large percentage who don't have access to a plan. So certainly having access to a plan, such as, for example, through the Automatic Ira or the programs in Oregon, will help get more people covered. Because to put in context what was talked about earlier, we have a coverage rate in this country of about 50%, but that coverage rate has not changed in 4 decades. We've changed what type of plans people have, but we haven't really changed the overall number. So doing more to establish more plans would be helpful. Also, we've seen that automatic enrollment has been incredibly helpful. When plans have automatic enrollment, we get significantly more people who basically, through inertia, right, are going to end up doing the right thing, being in a plan, and not the wrong thing, being out of a plan. And so we think that can be very helpful as well. So getting people access to a plan and having automatic enrollment are probably 2 of the most helpful things that we can do to improve coverage.
All right, thank you. And Treasurer Reed, I guess I understand you were raised in Idaho?
I was, Mr. Chair.
Well, I'm glad to hear that today. Thank you. I appreciated hearing about your experience with the Oregon Saves program. It certainly is an interesting program, and I'd be interested to hear more about how the interaction has been with employer-provided retirement plans. How have the employers reacted to this program now that it's been in effect for a few years?
Mr. Chair, Senator, thank you for the question. I would say there was, some degree of skepticism as we got started. There's always some danger in being the first to try something, but in the years that we've proceeded, we've addressed a lot of those concerns, and I think there's a range of opinions, of course, but what has really been striking to me is the number of small employers, and I heard this echoed through your opening comments and some of the other testimony, who have wanted to provide retirement options for their employees, but have struggled to do so either because of their other obligations or the cost or the time or those sorts of things. There's a restaurateur in the community where I live, Beaverton, who always comes to mind, who summarized this really well. He said, I'd love to do this for my employees, but I don't have an HR department. I got sandwiches to make. And I think we have addressed a lot of the anxiety that people felt, as evidenced by the testimony that was offered in the Oregon legislature as we were doing some cleanup. There's a relentless focus on our part to make it as easy as possible, as light a touch as we can possibly muster for employers, and as easy for individual savers to participate. Our point here is to introduce something that is otherwise complicated and intimidating for a lot of people in a way that makes it easy for them to get on a good path.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Crapo. Senator Grassley is next, and he's in person.
Yeah, thank you. Before I ask a couple questions, I'd like to say that I appreciate, Chairman, you're holding this hearing to examine proposals to enhance and expand access to retirement savings vehicle It was a pleasure working with you in the last Congress to enact a bipartisan retirement plan that this committee had worked on, I think, over a course of 3 Congresses. That legislation, known as the Secures Act, made a number of important reforms to expand access and increase participation of employer-sponsored retirement plans. Chief among these reforms was to make it easier for employers to pool together to sponsor a group retirement plan for their workers by harnessing economies of scale and reducing administrative costs. These reforms are making it easier for small business to offer retirement plans. As a result, these reforms have the potential to expand retirement plan coverage for millions of American workers. The Secure Act represents an important step forward in improving Americans' retirement security. But because we have a dynamic economy, that's why we're here now, to see what we can do to further the successes of the past. My first question will be to Mr. Graff. I, along with Senators Hassan and Lankford, introduced the Improving Access to Retirement Savings Act, which will make it pooled employer plans accessible to more employees. Our bill clarifies that the small business retirement plan startup credit applies to businesses joining pooled plans, and also would allow nonprofit employers to just join pooled plans. So to you, can you expand upon how these provisions could help more workers gain access to workplace retirement plans?
Thank you, Senator Grassley, and absolutely. I think these are very important changes that we fully support. You particularly mentioned your proposal that would expand pooled employer plans to cover 403B plans, which is a particular type of plan like a 401k that is utilized by nonprofit organizations. And as I know you're aware, in Iowa as well as throughout the country, there are literally hundreds of thousands of these smaller nonprofit organizations that do really important work throughout the country. They want to be able to provide lower cost retirement savings options to their employees, and this proposal, by allowing them to pool, just like private sector employers, would go a long way towards increasing access for those employees to a retirement savings program at work. And the tax credit is also important to clarify, so that if a nonprofit organization or any organization joins a pooled employer plan that might be in existence for a number of years, that they can still get the startup tax credit even though the pooled employer plan has been around for a while, because they haven't had a plan before. So these are important changes we support.
A third provision in our bill would allow employers to make retroactive plan amendments to increase benefit accruals for employees up until the due date of the employer's tax return. Can you elaborate on how this provision could be used by small employers to increase their retirement savings of their employees?
Absolutely. Thank you again, Senator Grassley. A lot of small businesses, as you know, really don't know what their financial situation is until after the end of the year. And prior to this proposal, or under current law, a small business, mid-sized business, couldn't do a profit-sharing contribution because they didn't know whether or not they had any profit until after they've had a chance to do the books and figure out where they stood. And this would allow them more time up until the due date of the tax return to assess how their prior year's performance was, and hopefully benefit their employees by providing a bonus profit-sharing contribution that would be retroactively applied to the prior year.
My last question will be to Ms. Robinson. In today's economy, it's become increasingly rare for employees to spend their entire career working for one employer. Bureau of Labor says the average worker switches jobs about every 4 years. With such frequent turnover, employees may lose track of employer-based retirement accounts they contributed to early on in their career. Can you comment on ways we could make sure workers aren't leaving retirement savings behind when they switch jobs?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, and this is a concern for our member companies as well. So one, we discussed earlier was the auto portability, to make sure that as participants leave one job, they are automatically tracking that retirement account with them to their next job. Another is the Lost and Found Registry, which was also mentioned, which would give participants a database that they could look for accounts that they may have left at a previous employer where there may be a merger or acquisition has happened, and they no longer know the name of that employer. So those are two things that could really help in terms of making sure that there aren't accounts left behind.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. Next is Senator Carper on the web.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning to each of our witnesses, and many thanks for joining us today. Research shows that, a little bit of background, I used to be treasurer of the state of Delaware for about 6 years, and focused a whole lot on our pension system, focused a lot on deferred compensation program to ensure and encourage folks to save, state employees to save, and in some cases for the state to match that. We also here in the Senate, I've partnered up with Rob Portman, Senator Portman from Ohio, to make some changes in the thrift savings plan to encourage greater participation, and I think to good success. So these are the issues I care about, and they're really important. You outlined and highlighted that, and I couldn't agree more. The research shows that access to a retirement account is critical to helping workers save for their future, and workers are, I'm told, some 15 times more likely to save if there is an option to do so through their employer, 15 times. However, nearly 1/2 of private sector employees don't have access to employer sponsored plans, and many of these individuals work for small businesses which face heightened costs to establish these plans. In recent years, I'm told a number of states have established automatic IRA programs that help extend coverage to these workers. States like Oregon have had real success in expanding access to retirement savings vehicles, including under the leadership of one of our witnesses, Mr. Reed. It's good to have you back before us. I'm encouraged that leaders in my own state of Delaware are considering implementing a similar program under the leadership of our state treasurer. I have a question. This will be for Mr. Reed and Mr. Sertner. How can the federal government better help facilitate the broader adoption and success of auto IRA plans? And what features of the Oregon auto IRA program could be replicated by similar programs?
Mr. Chair, Senator Carper,
please.
I'm sorry to interrupt. If you're finished, I think it's a great question. I think there is a huge opportunity for Congress to provide leadership here. I would hope that whatever legislation you might consider to enact would preserve the pioneering role that states like Oregon and Delaware and others are providing in establishing and designing and implementing programs like this. And I hope that it would allow states to continue that experimentation, that innovation, to adapt to changing circumstances and needs of our various states, potentially even collaborating among states. We've seen significant potential benefits there as well. And I think there's real benefit to preserving what Louis Brandeis said as a state's role as a laboratory of democracy. Those commonalities amongst the different states, the experiences that we've had, I think are already leading to better outcomes for individual savers and ultimately for the entire country.
Thank you for that. Mr. Sturgeon, your comments, please.
Yeah, and Senator Carper, I think I would agree with much of what was just said. We had previously and have proposals now to do a federal auto IRA to make sure that every state can have this access and automatic enrollment that would really help move people into the retirement system that we don't have today. But I think it is important that states which have really taken the lead on this now be allowed to continue and to do what they're doing across the country. We have at least 10 states that have done this. We have another 15 or so that are in process of either moving it or looking at it. We want to make sure we continue to encourage that while we also look at the federal level to see if we can bring this nationally, because we do need to make a change like this that brings access and automatic enrollment to really the rest of the population if we want to really bump up the numbers of people who are actually beginning to contribute to accounts for retirement.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Stewart. I have one question I'd like to ask you, just really short answers from each of our witnesses, please. And the question for each of you is, in addition to automatic enrollment and auto escalation of contributions, what are most effective behavioral incentives or educational tools Congress could consider, should consider to promote increased savings?
Mr. Chair, Senator Carper, I think you've nailed it. I think it is automatic enrollment. I think those auto escalations, and I think additional credits and matching mechanisms like the proposal that the Chairman Wyden has offered are very good starts.
Okay, thank you. Other witnesses, please. Mr. Cerny?
I would agree with that. Having matching contributions would be very helpful because we know that incentives like a saver's tax credit, like an employer matching contribution, will also greatly increase not just what one may be contributing, but obviously will be adding to the savings with the match.
Thank you. Mr. Graff?
Thank you, Senator. Coverage and auto enrollment are absolutely the key. The data consistently shows that. And then once we get workers to say we want to do everything we can to encourage and incentivize them to keep the money in the plan or in the IRA. That's also important, is preventing leakage.
And lastly, Ms. Robinson, please.
Thank you, Senator. I agree with what my colleagues have said, but I do want to highlight that for those participants who already are auto-enrolled, auto-escalated, let's keep moving forward and thinking of new ways to continue to incentivize employers to offer these plans, but also incentivize employees to increase their savings as well.
Here's to you, Mrs. Robinson, and to all of our other witnesses. Timely testimony, important testimony. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Carper. Here's our plan, colleagues, for the morning. We're going to have a vote at 11:30. Senator Crapo and I are going to keep this moving. I thank my colleague for doing it. We've got a lot of senators because of the great interest in this, so we're just going to keep moving. Senator Cardin, who many have invoked his name because of his good work.
Well, Senator Wyden, Senator Crapo, thank you both for your leadership on this issue, and thank you for conducting this hearing. Just an observation, when I first started on retirement security issues with Congressman Portman, when we were both in the House of Representatives many years ago, it was kind of lonely. We didn't have a lot of people interested. And I must tell you, this is such an encouraging hearing to see how many initiatives have been made by members of our committee, how many members of this committee are so interested in expanding opportunity for savings, retirement. And I want to just give a shout out to a tragic loss this week of Mike Enzi, a member of this committee. I joined him on sponsoring the National Retirement Security Month issues, and we miss his common sense in this committee, and his loss was a tragic loss this week. I just want to acknowledge that. Senator Portman and I have introduced legislation, and I think almost all of the bills that we've talked about are trying to focus on how we can get lower income workers and more people involved in savings for retirement. I think that's what we're all trying to do as the entry level. There is the leakage issue that if we were designing retirement plans today from scratch, we wouldn't make it as easy for people to be able to divert retirement funds for other purposes. But we are where we are, and we now need to work with the current system, and I think our focus is to help lower income workers to save for their retirement. The auto IRAs and the auto issues are fine, but the issue for a lot of lower wage workers is, can they afford to put money into retirement? And that's why an employer-sponsored plan where there's an employer match and an employer puts money on the table, it's hard to leave money on the table. So employees are likely to participate. We know that in the thrift savings plan here as federal workers. If you don't have that, the Savers Credit fills the gap. And that's why the expansion of the Savers Credit is such an important part of any effort to try to expand opportunities, and it's included in our legislation. I also want to mention Senator Wyden's initiative in regards to student loan payment, because young workers have to pay their student loan debt. That could be the employer's match. That solves a problem, and we get more people engaged. I also think expansion of part-time workers, because part-time workers are lower wage workers, and any way that we can get part-time workers engaged in the plans, I think, is also an important part. Enhanced catch-up is contributions are important because particularly women leave the workplace during parts of their years. This gives them a chance of equality. And we've already talked about the automatic enrollment. That's critically important because too many people make their decisions by inaction. And it's access for small companies to get plans is also important. That's all these issues are incorporated in a lot of the bills that have been brought forward. So I guess my question, I'll start with Mr. Graff, is that if you had to pick the priorities on trying to enhance lower wage workers being able to participate in retirement savings, which of these tools do you think are most important, or do we have to have a menu opportunity here that one will not be sufficient without reinforcing other areas?
So we've done a lot of economic modeling with a lot of these proposals, and thank you, Senator Cardin, for your decades of leadership on these issues. And it really is telling what will move the needle in terms of getting millions of more people into the system and really boosting savings at a macro level. And the two things that are clear are coverage, getting people access to a plan, and auto-enrolling them as much as possible. And I think right behind that would be some, as in your proposal, some type of booster incentive for folks, because a lot of folks, particularly in small businesses, a lot of government workers in smaller municipalities, don't have that match incentive that private sector workers do. So that combination, what we have found, and this is work that was done by the Nonpartisan Employee Benefits Research Institute, is that would increase savings over the next 10 years by over $6 trillion.
My time's running short. If I could just emphasize one point and get your response to that with the Chairman's indulgence. The tax deferral is an important point for people putting money away for retirement. We find younger workers, it's unfortunately, in and of itself, doesn't motivate them to set up an IRA. I agree, automatic enrollment helps. Employers match definitely helps. The Savers Credit helps. Am I correct in that?
Absolutely, and making it into a match, a true match like you're proposing that would be contributed to the 401k and IRA account of the worker is also a key part of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cardin. Next will be Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for just a succession of really important hearings that we're doing. And I mean, this is an amazing committee and the jurisdiction we have and everything that you've done in this committee, and these hearings are so helpful. I want to start with Ms. Robinson. On March, I said March 6th, the day that the Senate passed the American Rescue Plan. We had been voting all night for 13 hours. It was Saturday about noon. I turned to Senator Casey, also a member of this committee, said this is the best day in my political career. And I said it for two reasons. One, that the Senate passed the child tax credit, which a number of people in this committee, particularly Senator Bennett and Senator Wyden, had worked on with us, that we passed that, which will have a huge impact on this country for years, we hope. And the other was the multi-employer pension bill, and that was included in it. So I want to talk to you for a moment, Ms. Robinson, about that. The PBG was tasked with writing regulations earlier this month that released an interim final rule. It's a momentous program that's going to protect workers across, especially the industrial heartline elsewhere, but especially there. I'm proud of the great work that the PBGC has done in a short period of time to get these regulations written. I'm concerned, however, about whether the regulations as written will provide enough funding to keep plans solvent for the 30 years as required by statute. One of my main concerns as a PBGC is determining the amount of financial assistance by assuming the plan will earn 5.5% annually for 30 years. At the same time, they require plans to invest the special financial assistance in investment grade bonds, which typically yield about 2%. It seems it could encourage the plans in the worst shape to take undue risk with their plan assets in order to earn the amount required to keep them solvent. Have you heard this concern, Ms. Robinson, from your members? And tell me what they're saying about this.
Yes, thank you, Senator, for the question and for your incredible work on the multi-employer pension crisis and the work done in the American Rescue Plan. Because of the size of ERIC member companies, we would be the last man standing. So it was crucial that these reforms happen, and we were very pleased to see that legislation passed. And we are working with the PBGC. We are looking at the guidance that they just put out, and your point is correct. There has been concerns raised that if there's not enough flexibility for plans to be able to use the special funds in the same investments or different investments as they use their regular assets, then these funds might not last as the way Congress intended and really be used to help the system, and not just the multi-employer system itself, but the businesses and the economy it was tend to also save as well.
Thank you for that. Mr. Graff, on a different issue, I want to ask about this section 402L of the tax code. This provision allows retired public safety officers to exclude up to $3,000 from their income when they use it to pay for health care or for long-term care insurance, as long as the premiums are paid directly by the retirement system to the insurance provider. This doesn't work for retired Ohio police and firefighters. It also doesn't in Oklahoma and Iowa and Texas and Maryland, Virginia and Colorado and Nebraska. Would you support repealing the direct pay requirement, increasing the exclusion from $3,000 to $6,000? Give me your thoughts on that.
Thanks, Senator Brown. I think the issue.
Mr. Graff?
Thank you, Senator Brown. I think the issue with respect to the exclusion for retired public safety officers, very important issue. Obviously, these are people that we all care about and very much appreciate the amazing work that they do protecting us. My understanding is that the problem is the fact that a lot of these programs, like the one in Ohio, have converted to it from a direct payment to passing these subsidies through health reimbursement accounts. And it certainly, from my standpoint, makes sense to also treat them as direct payments, regardless of whether they're being directly sent to a health insurance company or being paid to that health insurance company through a health reimbursement account. There should be really no distinction. As for the amount, I think that's something that ought to be looked at. I haven't seen any specific data as to what where the costs are. Certainly, we all know healthcare costs are rising. One of the things to also think about might be indexing that amount. So that's certainly something that we'd be happy to take a look at. But as to the fundamental issue as to whether it should be treated as a direct payment, we certainly agree with you.
Well, indexing, if we can raise first and then index, but okay, I appreciate that, Mr. Graff. Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, again, thanks for holding this hearing.
Thank you, Senator Brown. I know this has been part of your efforts to help working families, and it's great to work with you. Another friend of those workers, Senator Cortez Mastow, who will be next. And then we're going to recognize our friend from Wyoming, and I'm going to tell him a little bit about what happened yesterday in this room. Okay, Senator Cortez Mastow.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to the panelists. It has been such an important conversation this morning, and so appreciate all of your input. Mr. Sertner, let me start with you. In the most recent legislative session in Nevada, our Nevada legislature considered a measure to establish an auto IRA program, much like Oregon Saves. The bill was met, however, with stiff opposition from some in the retirement industry who characterized state-based plans as a low-yield burden on taxpayers and suggested that the new pooled employer plan rules set forth under the Secure Act would be a preferable alternative for employers in Nevada. I was hoping you could respond to some of these criticisms and talk about the features of the state-based option and whether it be population served or specific benefits that lead state legislatures to get involved despite the opposition.
Yes, Senator, quite frankly, I don't understand that argument at all. Anyone who's actually interested in coverage should understand that these are different options. We supported pooled employer plans, and those are targeted actually at small employers who want to take advantage of economies of scale in setting up pension plans and taking on fiduciary duties. The auto IRA mechanisms really reach almost a different kind of employer who's not interested in setting up an ERISA covered plan. And it's much simpler and easier for them. They have less tasks. They don't have fiduciary responsibilities. And you can get a lot more people covered, particularly individuals who aren't even associated with an employer, such as gig workers. So they should work complementary. It's not a choice of one or the other. And in terms of your comment about this being bad for taxpayers, I think just the opposite. To the extent that we can get more people to accumulate savings and have savings in retirement, that's going to be less people who are going to have to fall back on state or federal systems where they need money because they'll have their own savings that they can rely on. So I think actually it'll help taxpayers. So I think the argument is just completely off base.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And listening to the conversations this morning and all of your opening statements and your responses to the question, there's nothing wrong with more choices for individuals to decide how they want to participate in a retirement plan. But I do also appreciate the comments around financial literacy. I know just listening this morning, the concerns about the racial retirement savings gap and how it contributes to the racial wealth gap that creates intergenerational challenges for families working to get ahead. Nevada has a large Latino population, their Spanish-speaking population, and we found that the language barrier can create access challenges for communities seeking access to the services and supports that can improve financial stability. So I'd like to just open it up to the panel. I'm curious, can any of you talk about efforts that the retirement industry has engaged in to enhance financial literacy among our diverse communities? Anyone want to take that on?
Thank you, Senator. I think the retirement plan industry is very much aware of the challenges facing all communities of color, and language barriers have been an issue. I'm happy to say that efforts recently, particularly in the area of financial wellness, have really been quite successful in trying to improve that for people that have access to a plan. And so more and more of the advisors and firms that work with employers helping to set up and maintain plans have been providing these type of programs, financial wellness programs, participant education, and doing so on a multilingual basis. Obviously, we need to do more. Probably the biggest thing, as I think a lot of us have emphasized, is the importance of getting more working Americans, particularly in communities of color, covered by these programs so they have a fair chance at getting a comfortable retirement, because it's really the only way we've gotten them effectively to save.
Yeah, no, and I couldn't agree more. And just the statistics that you talked about earlier, the panelists talked about in our Latinx communities and our Black communities, we need to do more. There needs to be more financial literacy. There needs to be more outreach. If it is auto enrollment, whatever it is, I think it is worth making the effort to do so. This is a great discussion. I have more questions. I will submit those for the record. I just so appreciate Mr. Chairman and the ranking member and so many members of this committee really focused on this issue and how we ensure that so many across this country have access and an opportunity for a retirement savings. So thank you again.
Thank you for your good work. Before I recognize our colleague from Wyoming for his remarks, I just wanted to pass on briefly what happened in this hearing room yesterday. The grief welling up from both sides with colleague after colleague talking about Mike and what we remembered so fondly. And I read a text where he invited me to Gillette, and he was worried my wife wouldn't eat steak and beef. Mike was worried about it. Well, she happens to love steak, but that was vintage Mike Enzi. He was always caring about other people. So I just wanted you to know so you can tell Diane, John, just please tell her that this outpouring of grief, because that's not what's supposed to happen when you retire. When you retire, you're supposed to have a lot of years, and a lot of years with family. So please tell Diane that everybody here is thinking about her, and we recognize your 5 minutes.
Well, I will most certainly do that, Mr. Chairman. I'm so very grateful for you and other comments, and we've heard from so many members. the entire Senate prayer breakfast today. We had big pictures of Mike up there in various parts of the world and some of the missionary work he'd done overseas in Africa. Every member, Republican and Democrat, had the kindest things to say about the kindest man you would ever know. He was a long-term member of this committee, amazing job at the Senate, 24 years, always won, but big numbers. And it's because people really, they respected him because he respected them. They understood him because he understood them and their problems. And they believed in Mike because they knew he believed in them. And it was a model for all of us. So I'm very grateful for the kind comments of you, other senators on this committee, and the entire body of the United States Senate. Yesterday on the floor, Senator Leahy, as President Pro Tem, started, and then the majority leader and the minority leader both spoke. Mike, very kind, as you can imagine, and Cynthia Lummis and I gave presentations as well, and big pictures of Mike and the smile. And last night we met with his staff, former staff members that are, some of them are still on the Hill, others from the community, and we had a big gathering in Senator Lummis's office just to share some of the great stories that we all have of a memory of a remarkable man. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Very grateful. Also, I want to thank you and Senator Crapo for holding this important hearing. A secure retirement is important for all of our constituents, and federal policy should reflect that importance. So for Mr. Graff, we have data here on employee access and participation rates. And for employees working at small businesses, fewer than 50 employees, only half of them have access to a workplace retirement plan, it looks like. All of these small businesses, it seems like only about a third of the employees actually participate in the plans. So we have seen various proposals to improve participation in the plans. What can Congress do to help small employers use these proposals to encourage participation in plans?
Thank you, Senator. One of the things that is critical in terms of getting workers to actually participate, and the data is very clear on this, is auto-enrollment. We've talked about that a little bit before, but the extent we can encourage smaller employers, frankly, all employers, to auto-enroll their workers into these plans, what we see from a behavioral economic standpoint is that they stick with it. They continue to participate. So the two critical elements, having access in the workplace, so getting small businesses to adopt a plan, making it easier for them. We did one amazingly important step in the Secure Act with pooled employer plans, and thank you for that. But I think there's some other things that we can do to make the smallest of businesses, for them to make it easier for them to offer these programs. One is a tax credit, as some have been proposing, that would be 100% of the costs for the smallest of businesses. There's something to be said for being able to tell a small business owner that this is effectively free, that it's not going to cost you anything. The marketing value of that is very meaningful. And then there's some things that we could do for the smallest of businesses around safe harbors to make the rules even simpler for them so that it's cost-free and worry-free. If we can do those things and do automatic enrollment, we can make a long way towards getting the employees that you're talking about part of the system.
So in terms of the auto-enrollment, it's kind of like for organ donors, opt-in versus opt-out, and making the decision there where two countries that from organ donation numbers, big or small, relate to whether people have to choose a decision.
Exactly, precisely.
So in your testimony, you mentioned the importance, and you just worked in the word cost of how this. So what costs do small businesses face today when setting up and running a retirement plan for their employees? Because as you said, if we can get it to zero, there's much more of an incentive.
Absolutely. So the two chief costs are the administrative costs associated with implementing a plan. And there are requirements and laws and rules and regulations, and there's a cost associated with that. And then for some employers, there's a cost associated with having to make contributions to the plan, even if they really can't afford it, to satisfy certain non-discrimination rules. And so I think a combination of encouraging auto-enrollment, but also for the smallest of businesses, maybe doing a safe harbor for smaller businesses that would streamline those regulations make it easier for them to put a plan in first without having to deal with both the admin cost and the employer contribution costs would go a long way towards expanding coverage in the small business sector.
So then, in your opinion, do the proposals that we're discussing here today, do they make it easier for small businesses to establish retirement plans for their employers? And is there more that we can, for their employees, and is there more we can do?
I think that a lot of these proposals do move in that direction, but I also think there are additional things we could do to make it easier.
Yeah, what might those be?
Well, for example, you could have for the smallest of businesses it's called a safe harbor design, where if with lower limits, because a lot of small businesses, they don't need to save a lot. It's really just start, saving a few $1,000s for many of these business owners goes a long way towards the ultimate goal. If we could create a plan that was a safe harbor plan, perhaps with lower limits, and all of the testing and administrative and regulatory requirements could be eliminated for those smaller business plans, that would be have a tremendous effect in terms of making it easier for them.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. I believe next we'll have Senator Thune, who I'm told is on the web.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Johnny, speak up, please. Would you? We couldn't hear you.
Okay. Hey,
Good.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Ron. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank the witnesses for being here today, as well as the Finance Committee reviews the state of retirement savings in our nation and a variety of proposals intended to further encourage Americans' safe retirement. This question is for Ms. Robinson. And in your testimony, you outline a number of proposals that have been introduced this Congress to encourage retirement savings, one of which would allow employers to make matching 401k contributions for employees paying down student loan debt. Do you believe companies, both large and small, would choose to make these matching contributions? And in addition, for employers choosing to make these matching contributions, in your view, to what degree of confidence would they have in knowing their employees are in fact making their monthly student loan payments in full to the loan servicer?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. First, yes, we are very supportive of this provision, and this is something that a lot of times as a policy person, you bring ideas to your member companies and ask them if they're okay with it, but this is one that they came to us with. They were definitely seeing from their employees, people were leaving positions for what they called low dollar amounts because every dollar was needed to repay their student loan benefits. And so something like this, any benefit they could see where they could help people with their student loan repayment and also help them contribute to their retirement would be very beneficial and critical. In terms of making sure that people are actually making the student loan repayments, there are already in place employer-provided student loan payment assistance programs. So there are payroll providers and other third-party administrators that are helping employers verify this information, and to do this in conjunction with the 401k plan would be something that could easily be done and verified.
Thank you. And this is a question, frankly, for any of the witnesses. As you know, the Secure Act increased the required minimum distribution age from 70 and a half to 72. And proposals under consideration this year would further increase the RMD age to 75 over the next decade. Could any of you share your views on proposals to further increase the RMD age, and to what extent 75 is the most appropriate age for it to be increased further? And in addition, since Congress increased the RMD age to 72 through the Secure Act in 2019, can any of you speak to what extent we've already seen the effects of that increase, or if it is too soon to tell?
Senator, I think it may be too soon to tell from the previous change, but what is clear is that to the extent that you do raise the age, you're going to do a couple things. One, you're going to simplify the rules because obviously people aren't going to have to deal with the issue for a number of years, and that'll help simplify it. It will also ensure that people can keep money in the plans longer. Remember, these distribution rules are based on lifetime estimates, and they were set, I think almost 50 years ago now. So if you sort of inflated those ages, 75 is probably about the right age. And also, we want to make sure that we're not asking people to, on average, to take their money out too fast, because obviously half the folks are going to be living longer than average. So we want to be able to make sure that people can, keep money in their plans. A similar proposal that's on the table is to have a threshold, income threshold, below which the minimum distribution rules wouldn't apply. Again, that would be very much of a simplification rule because anybody below that level just wouldn't have to deal with those rules at all and get caught up in the potential penalties and so forth for not obeying the rules.
Okay. Anybody else?
I mean, I'd
All
like
right,
to just,
go
I'd
ahead.
like to just echo what David said about the idea of having an amount, a safe harbor amount of contributions in an IRA or a plan that would be exempt from the required minimum distribution rules. It's for a lot of folks in retirement, for elderly folks, it's very complicated. And if they've got, $20,000, $30,000 in an IRA, trying to figure out that amount is extremely complicated. And a lot of them don't have access to professionals to help them figure it out. And so if we could come up with some amount, I've seen proposals, I think, for like $100,000, David, where our folks, seniors, would be able to avoid having to deal with this altogether. It would be a huge simplification for a lot of folks.
Okay, thank you. I've got another question, Mr. Chairman. My time's running out. Maybe I can submit it for the record, but I do want to get Mr. Graff, you on the record with respect to the issue of the gig economy and, the workforce increase 50% between 2001 and 2016, and whether existing retirement plans like pooled employer plans, for example, adequately accommodate independent contractors and their ability to save for retirement. So I'll put that one to you on the record. But would be interested in getting your response to that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank my colleague. I'm very interested as well in this issue that Senator Thune is talking about. So I thank my colleague for asking that. We've got to vote on. Let's see if we can get Senator Langford and Senator Daines in and still somehow make the vote. Senator Crapo is trying to get back. So Senator Langford.
That's great. Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thanks for the bipartisan conversation on retirement savings. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. This is an issue we should be able to work together on, so I appreciate that. Senator Grassley and Senator Hassan and I partnered together to reintroduce the Improving Access to Retirement Savings Act, which some of you have mentioned already. Appreciate that, trying to deal with multi-employer plans. Then last month, Senator Bennett and I introduced the Enhancing Emergency and Retirement Savings Act of 2021, which a couple of you have mentioned already today, so I appreciate that, and I want to be able to drill down on that a little bit more. This is a result of conversations that I've had with multiple folks in my state that want to be able to set aside for retirement, but are also worried about not having enough in their savings. And so they think, how can I save for retirement when I don't even have enough in my emergency account? So they just don't do retirement savings and stop setting anything aside on this. The concern is, how do we actually incentivize that when the most recent survey from a couple of years ago said that there's 4 in 10 Americans couldn't even come up with $400 if they had to at the last minute. So the goal of the legislation is that Senator Bennett and I have together is to try to figure out how can we create a flexibility in the plans that if you have retirement savings plans, you could one time a year take out $1,000 as an emergency without penalty. It would give you the opportunity to be able to pay that back. When you'd actually paid that back, you could do it again, but you'd be limited in the number of times. We don't want this to be a bank account. We want it to be retirement savings, but we do want people to have access to those retirement savings when they have an emergency. Mr. Robinson, you mentioned that earlier in your oral testimony. You mentioned your written testimony as well. Is that the right kind of flexibility to be able to give to individuals, the right amount, the right way to be able to take this on?
Thank you. Thank you for both your work on this and for the question. We believe the flexibility is appropriate both ways for the participant, that they have this money in the retirement savings. So when you do come to them and say, hey, let's put this money away, and the response sometimes is, I don't have enough, or I might need this for emergency later down the road, you can say you can take this out for an emergency. It's also flexible for the plan sponsor in terms of not having to set up a separate account or maintain different account information for the participant. The amount of $1,000 we think is appropriate. We got responses back from our membership that was anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000. So I think there's still room for conversation in that. But I think the consensus was definitely on the smaller side. You don't want it to be too large to encourage, as you said, people taking it out for things other than emergencies. But you do want to make it large enough that they can cover an emergency that comes up.
Right. Mr. Graff, you work with a lot of different employers. How would this flexibility work? Is this the kind of thing that employers are looking for as well? Because we're trying to design this in such a way it's simple for employers, simple for the plans themselves to be able to manage, and simple for individuals to be able to get access to funds in case of an emergency. Would this work in this kind of structure from what you see?
Definitely, Senator Langford, and I also want to say thank you for your leadership on this important issue. The issue of emergency savings, particularly over the last year and a half, has become particularly obvious and acute. A problem, as you mentioned, the fact that so many Americans couldn't come up with $400 if in the case of emergency. And this would go a long way to solving that problem and do so in a way that's not too much of a burden on employers because it doesn't require them to maintain two different types of saving systems, and also do so in a way that doesn't undermine the existing retirement savings system, so because employees aren't forced with a choice between one account versus another account. So we think this is the absolute right way to go, and it will make a huge difference in terms of making people not only have to deal with unfortunate situations, but frankly more comfortable for them to save in the first place because they'll know that in the case of emergency, they'd have access to this money.
Mr. Robinson, you in your written testimony, and then you just mentioned it in your oral testimony, I don't know if everybody caught it, I caught it when you said it, you brought up an incredibly wonky budget issue of the issue of single employer pension plan premiums being considered on budget, and so they're used as a pay for and used for spending elsewhere. My friend and all of our friend, Mike Enzi, that passed away this week, that was his bill that actually our office is now carrying now, and we have through this year, not just since his passing obviously this week, but we started earlier this year, that we're working together bipartisan support as he had bipartisan support for that in the past. I was surprised when you mentioned that because a lot of people don't dig down into that, but we think that's a really important issue. Why is that important to you?
Thank you. Thank you for your work on this. Thank you for allowing me to be even more wonky and talking about it even more. So single employer PBGC premiums for employers that offer defined benefit plans, the increasing unnecessarily the premiums has led them to make negative decisions about their plans, whether it's to freeze the plan, to not allow new workers in an effort to get that number down. And the best way to get the number down is to have fewer people who are subject to that premium, which is unfortunate because the PBGC single employer fund is adequately funded and has been for the last 10 years, so it hasn't been necessary to have an increase. And the PBGC, neither the PBGC nor the administration has called for an increase in these premiums. They've been done simply to raise money on the budgetary side, and it's a little bit of a gimmick because the money goes to the PBGC in a lockbox. It can only be used for people who are in defined benefit plans, but it shows up in the budget numbers as going into general treasuries and can be used for other things. So we've been working very hard, and we appreciate your efforts on this, both in educating the Congress about this, what we consider a budgetary gimmick that has a negative impact on retirement plans, and moving forward to make sure that this doesn't happen anymore. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Daines.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to be here today to talk about the importance of retirement security and some of the ways that Congress could help Montanans and all Americans better prepare for retirement. One very easy thing Congress could do to help current and future retirees is to pass the bipartisan bill they introduced with Senator Warren, which is the Retirement Savings Lost and Found Act. I'm happy this legislation has actually been included in the House Ways and Means Chairman Neal and Ranking Member Brady's Securing a Strong Retirement Act, as well as in Senators Card and Portman's Security and Savings Act. Our bill recognized that Montanans and Americans are switching jobs at higher rates than ever before and are often unknowingly leaving behind their 401ks. In fact, these numbers are staggering. According to an analysis released just in May of this year, there'll be 25 million forgotten 401k accounts. I'm not sure I would have forgotten one, but I guess that happens now. That is about $1.35 trillion in assets, representing 20% of the $6.7 trillion in total assets in 401k plans. Our bill would solve this problem by creating a national lost and found registry for retirement accounts. Using this registry, employees will be able to find all of their former employee-sponsored retirement accounts into one easy location online. It's a bipartisan bill, will be a huge help for employers as well, who often spend countless hours trying to reunite employees with their lost accounts. It's a win for our workers, our families, and businesses, and I hope we can get this passed into law. Question for the panel. We'll start with you, Ms. Robinson. We'll just go down the line since you've been wonking out here and geeking out on policy. Do you agree that creating some kind of retirement lost and found registry would help reunite workers and retirees with their missing retirement accounts?
Absolutely. So thank you for the legislation and for your work. We fully support it. The missing participant problem has been something that Eric has been working on with the Department of Labor for quite some time. Employers spend a lot of time and effort voluntarily setting up benefit plans with the ultimate goal of getting participants a retirement benefit. So finding these participants is a large part of what they consider important and is critical. To your point, not only are people changing jobs more, but companies are merging, acquiring other companies, their names are changing. And one of the things we found is that when employers try to connect with a participant, but the company name is now different from the company that they work for, they're hesitant to give personal information about a retirement plan. And so we think the registry would be very helpful, not only in addressing that issue, but really just raising the profile that there is this money out there that people may have forgotten about, and that they should really be looking at it and trying to get that money back to them.
I think we all remember those calculations that were shown by the earlier you get in, the greater effect that has certainly in terms of compounding effect of a retirement account, and just to help oftentimes younger employees just to consolidate that, find it, it'll help prepare them for retirement.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mr. Graff.
Thank you, Senator Daines, and we also fully support your effort in this area. We've heard from our thousands of plan sponsor members, and they are, as was just stated, very concerned about having to deal with these missing participants, and this would go a long way to helping solve that problem. In fact, we would even like to talk to you about perhaps expanding it a little bit more than its current level. So right now, there's a part of your proposal that would allow plan sponsors to send money over to the PBGC as a sort of way to collect these accounts, the actual assets in the account. And we'd like to at least discuss with you the idea of maybe expanding that a little bit so that amounts, somewhat higher amounts that are in accounts of missing participants can also be sent to the PBGC, because they're in a much better position to help find these lost individuals as opposed to a small business owner who really is in no position to figure out where these folks potentially are. And so we happily work with you about doing more.
Thanks, Mr. Graff. Happy to have that conversation as well. Thank you. Mr. Sertner.
Yes, and to be short and quick about it, we've supported your bill, as you know. We supported its inclusion in the House Ways and Means package. We certainly support the Senate acting on this as well. I think, as you know, it's really hard enough for people to save these days. So the least we can do is reunite people with their own money.
Great, thanks. Mr. Reed.
Mr. Chair, Senator Daines, I think it's a great idea. Anything we can do to reunite money with their rightful owners is good. Another thing Congress could do is help the U.S. Treasury send the billions of dollars of unclaimed savings bonds to state treasurers so they can reunite them with their rightful owners as well.
There's the voice of a state treasurer right there. Thank you. Senator Crapo, thank you.
Thank you. And I believe we have Senator Cantwell with us remotely. Senator? Is Senator Cantwell with us? How about Senator Young? Senator Young, are you with us?
Right here, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I want to thank our witnesses for spending their morning with this committee to discuss retirement security. This has been an issue of particular importance to me since I came into the U.S. House of Representatives back in 2011, and now as ranking member of the Subcommittee on Social Security, Pensions, and Family Policy. I'll continue to focus on meaningful ways we can help Americans prepare for their retirement. In Indiana, only 40% of the state's workforce participates in an employer-provided retirement plan. In fact, just half of all Hoosier workers are offered such a plan at all. I'll soon be reintroducing my Retirement Security Flexibility Act to help more Americans save for retirement, by expanding access to and participation in well-designed workplace retirement plans. Really two features to this legislation. First, my bill would enable more small businesses to offer retirement plans by providing flexibility on the employer contribution requirements for safe harbor eligibility. And second, the bill encourages those workplace plans to include automatic enrollment and automatic escalation provisions to make it easier for workers to participate in and more quickly escalate their savings. Mr. Graff, could you please speak for a moment on the barriers that currently prevent small business owners from offering a retirement plan for their employees?
Thank you, Senator Young. I think the two key issues that a lot of small businesses face on a daily basis is they're, frankly struggling through the challenges of the pandemic and other things that a small business owner has to deal with in terms of keeping their business going, revolve around administrative costs associated with plans, as well as you alluded to, and I think is an important part of your proposal, the idea of trying to have some flexibility around the cost associated with employer contributions. And so I think if we could do some things to address both of those points, either through tax credits or making the rules easier, it would go a long way to making it easier for businesses in Indiana, small businesses in Indiana, to offer plans to their employees. And we'd be happy to work with you on some other ideas around even simpler safe harbors for the smallest of businesses that would make it, for those very small businesses, make it easier for them as well.
I'll look forward to that opportunity to work together. How specifically would easing safe harbor eligibility rules for these smaller enterprises fit in with other incentives, such as the startup credit?
So the startup credit particularly gets to the administrative costs, and these are plans that are subject to lots of different rules and regulations, as I know you're aware, and so there's a certain cost associated with operating a plan that has to be met, and there are tax credits that were in the Secure Act, and there are proposals to actually expand those credits to 100% to cover those out-of-pocket costs for the first few years of a small business. So we can tell those small business owners that, hey, this is essentially free from an administrative standpoint. And then on the contribution side, there's an idea to have even a simpler safe harbor for smaller businesses, let's say 25, 50 employees or less, where they would not have to make any employer contributions necessarily if they can't afford it, as long as they have limits that are a little bit lower than a typical 401k plan. And so this, super simple safe harbor, if you will, would be a lot easier on those micro businesses because, one, there'd be a tax credit to fully cover the entire cost, and they wouldn't have to worry about the testing requirements that sometimes require them to make contributions they can't afford. And so really you could tell that small business owner, hey, there's no reason not to do this because this is effectively free.
Okay, thank you for that response. My time's expiring, so I think I'll end with maybe what I hope is a yes or no response from you. As I shift to the employee side, data from 2020 indicates that on average, around 87% of employees participated in retirement plans when those plans had an auto enrollment feature. And without auto enrollment, that number drops to 52%. The data also shows that 91% of employees who are auto enrolled don't drop out. So in your opening testimony, you shared that auto enrollment is the key to addressing racial inequalities in retirement plans. My proposal would further incentivize auto enrollment and auto escalation. Do you think that proposals like mine could help bridge racial inequalities as it relates to retirement security?
Very much so, Senator. It's very clear from the data that if we can get workers access to plans and get them auto-enrolled, that we can effectively, with respect to retirement savings, eliminate a large portion of the racial disparity that we've seen to date in a lot of the data. We have data that shows when you do both those things, you can pretty much eliminate that, and regardless of color, people are saving at the same rates.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Young. I believe Senator Cantwell is next, and then Senator Hassan. I just would say to colleagues on both sides, we're getting close to wrapping up. Senator Cantwell. Senator Hassan. All right, she's on her way. Okay. And do we have reports on Senator Cantwell? She's having audio difficulties. Okay. Was she planning to come in person?
I just lived with me. I believe that she doesn't have time to come over here, so there's something we put on the text.
Okay.
But I will distribute email to see if
Thank you for your eternal professionalism that I've seen for years. No reports on how long it might take, Senator Hassan.
Hi, Mr. Chairman.
There's Senator Cantwell.
Sorry.
Always able to use the potential of cyberspace. Senator Cantwell.
Thank you so much for this important hearing. One continuing challenge we face on retirement plans and the gap coverage is particularly for employees of small businesses and gig workers and those that are self-employed. The Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that 53% of businesses with less than 50 people have access to workplace retirement. By comparison, 69% of those with firms with more than 50 workers and 83% of those firms with more than 100 workers have retirement plans. So Mr. Graff, you also noted this in your testimony about the gap is most pronounced between African Americans and Latino workers. Thankfully, though, states are leading the way to expand retirement saving options through innovative solutions. In our state, we created a small business retirement marketplace in 2015, which makes it easier and less expensive for businesses to offer retirement saving options to employees. Washington employers with fewer than 100 employees are able to voluntarily participate in this marketplace, shop for lower costs, portable retirement saving plans for employees. Mr. Center, Mr. Graff, what has been the impact of these kind of marketplace on small business participation in making retirement plans affordable, and what is the impact in saving rates to those employees?
I think that you're rightly talking about targeting the small business sector, because we know that those with the least coverage are either those who are working for small businesses or those who are gig workers or independent contractors who may not be covered at all. And so we've been for years trying to provide incentives for small employers. The recent credit for employers to make it simpler and easier and less costly to put in plans is very helpful. Having automatic enrollment is very helpful. Anything we can do to expand access. The work that states are doing now to basically fill in the gaps for small employers who don't want to put in a plan, don't want to take on any of the fiduciary responsibility or any of the other costs or bothers because they're running a small business. They don't also want to run a plan. But having these state-run plans step in and facilitate programs and use payroll deduction to enable more people to save has really been, I think, the biggest jump and change that we've had in the last few years, and something I think more states should consider. And we're basically working at AARP across the country to encourage more states to adopt these employer-facilitated payroll deduction programs.
So I know in the chairman's state in Oregon, they have an auto IRA model, which allows workers to save through their employer's retirement saving plan. So what would we need to do at the federal level to aid in the implementation of these state-based auto IRA programs?
I think one big help is obviously a signal at the federal level. Well, one, we could do it federally for the states who are not engaged. Second would be to make sure that the federal level signals to the states that what you're doing is good and you can go ahead and keep experimenting and working on what you're doing at the state level. And a third piece is also improving the saver's tax credit so that small employers in particular will have a matching contribution, or the individuals can have a matching contribution for contributions that they make either for a small employer plan or that they're doing through some of these state-run programs. We know what incentives work. payroll deduction, automatic enrollment, matching contributions. So being able to get those to a more universal group of employees is what's going to really bump up the coverage numbers.
Mr. Chair, Senator
Thank you.
Campbell,
Well, Mr. Chairman, I know you and I are both in the state innovation camp, but I think, again, it shows you why allowing innovation to happen at a less bureaucratic level gets us answers that we need. So I hope we can pursue avenues to making small business retirement more of an option and more of a saver for so many Americans. So I thank you for the hearing and thank the witnesses.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. And the fact is that the Pacific Northwest is again out in front in the innovation derby, and we're very proud of that. And what has been striking is Mr. Graff has really touched on today, and we're going to wrap up here in a moment and talk about the bipartisan path forward. But what it really also allows us to say is when Oregon and Washington are doing this phenomenal work and leading the way, you partner with what we're talking about now, for example, at the federal level, and you get what Mr. Graff told us was this jaw-dropping number, Senator Hassan. I know you've had a lot of hearings this morning, but I mean, what Mr. Graff told us is the combination of these state efforts and these federal efforts for two groups, of people who can't save at all and can't save enough. If you mobilize innovative approaches at the state and federal level, Mr. Graff tells you in the next decade, you're going to make an enormous amount of difference for our families in New Hampshire and the like. We're going to talk about it when we wrap up. But I think it's great to see Oregon and Washington pave the way at the state level. And what we're going to try to do, and Senator Crapo and I have been talking about it, is match it at the federal level. Senator Hassan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and Ranking Member Crapo. And I never like to cede innovation chops to any other part of the state. We're pretty innovative in New England and New Hampshire, too. But boy, it's good to see the witnesses, and it's really good to be having this hearing because we want every American to be able to save for a dignified retirement. And that's really what this is all about. And I really look forward to continuing to work with all of my colleagues to do that. I have a couple of questions. I'll start with you, Ms. Robinson, because one of the things I've been focused on is military spouses and their capacity to save, because they often face a wide gap in terms of retirement because they move locations more frequently, so they don't always stay long enough in one job to become eligible for employer-sponsored retirement plans, and that obviously means they have less employer matches for retirement savings. So Senator Collins and I have a bill to help address this issue by incentivizing employers to make military spouses immediately eligible for retirement plan participation, including employer contributions. So, Ms. Robinson, do you believe that providing employer incentives would help military spouses save for more retirement?
Of course, all incentives help employees save for retirement, so we absolutely support that and thank your work. We haven't taken a position on this. I would have to take it back to our membership, but obviously our member companies are at the forefront of offering retirement plans, believe it's an important thing. So very happy to work with you to make sure administratively it's feasible and that whatever we do put in place is actually helpful to the spouses as they are moving from job to job.
Yes, I appreciate that very much. It's something that we've seen a lot of action on in a variety of different ways because military spouses face such unique situations. So thank you for being willing to take it back to your membership. I also wanted to talk generally to all of you about the issue of retirement savings for women, because women often struggle to save enough for retirement. They lag behind men due to a number of factors, including lower earnings and more time away from the workplace because they are primarily caregivers in a lot of circumstances. So the pandemic exacerbated many of these issues with nearly 1.8 million women leaving the workforce. So to each of you, how can Congress help address the retirement gap for women, especially as the country recovers from COVID-19? And we'll start with Treasurer Reed and then just move right down.
Mr. Chair, Senator Hassan, I think it's an excellent observation. The work that we're doing in our state continues to be about making it easier for people to get started at an earlier age and establish that habit the power, I think, of our example is not going to become fully realized until someone who starts maybe without realizing it early in their career gets to the point that that has become a habit and moves on. I think that's especially true for women and people of color who don't tend to have that access through their employer. So auto-enrollment, escalation, the credit that Senator Wyden and others have offered, I think those are all really important elements.
Well, thank you. Mr. Sertner?
Thank you. I think you make a very clear observation about women lagging behind, obviously for a number of reasons, including lower wages and less access to retirement plans, more part-timers. We're very strongly supportive of improving coverage for part-time workers. We know that's particularly helpful to women who are caregivers. We're generally very supportive of trying to improve access in general because women tend to be in workplaces that don't have any coverage. So if we can't get employer-provided coverage, that's where we need those state kinds of programs that we're doing in Oregon that will help people get access to a plan and a payroll deduction plan they don't have now. Again, we're talking about people who are generally lower income, so you need that additional, I think, incentive for them to also contribute. So improving on the Savers Credit, which is really a matching contribution at the federal level, will help both encourage people to contribute to a plan, but not only that, will obviously increase the size of the contribution amounts going to the plan. So I think a combination of those things can all help improve coverage and adequacy.
Thank you. Mr. Graff?
Thank you, Senator Hassan. The issue that you raise is extremely important, and in particular, what the data shows is that the coverage gap and the savings gap is particularly acute for single women. It's very similar challenges with communities of color that we've been discussing today. And what we found, and I'm happy to share this data with you, is that when you overlay proposals like the Auto IRA Act, the Encouraging Americans to Save Act, and steps to both get people covered, single women covered, as well as incentivize them to save, that you see really great boosts in savings rates among single females that I can show you. It's very promising.
Well, great. And if it's all right with the chair, Ms. Robinson, if you can quickly comment.
Sure. Representing plan sponsors who have already kind of tackled the coverage issue, I'll talk about increasing retirement savings. The increasing catch-up contributions is enormously helpful for women who may not have had the money earlier in their careers, later in their careers, to put more of that into that. And we would actually encourage even expanding that for other opportunities, such as being able to do make-up catch-up contributions if you had to take time off during your career. So in addition to the other things that have been mentioned, such as the student loan matching and the emergency savings provisions that obviously impact more than just women, but probably women in particular.
Well, thank you very much. And Mr. Chair, as we celebrate the 31st anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act this week, I also just want to recognize how important ABLE accounts have been to people with disabilities and look forward. And I know Treasurer Reed has been particularly involved in administering those accounts, so I'd look forward to continuing to strengthen them as well.
Well, thank you, Senator Hassan. And the fact that for years you have been such a strong voice for these families. And I guess there's something about the water, and New Hampshire and Oregon are always teaming up on these kinds of approaches to empower families that are having some real challenges and they just want a shot. And that's what you and Treasurer Reed have been all about. So we really look forward to working with you on these kinds of issues, and thank you for being a champion for empowering folks who are vulnerable to be able to save and participate in our society.
Thanks so much, and thanks again to all the witnesses.
Thank you. So Senator Crapo and I would say to our guests, have lengthy closing statements. And when a chair says that's going to happen, everybody slouches in their seat and says, oh my God, this is going to be a ghastly affair. No, both of us will be very brief, but you've been terrific, and this has really helped us build on our bipartisan tradition of working on these issues, and we'll recognize Senator Crapo, and my lengthy statement will take about 2 minutes. Okay, Senator Crapo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I will be brief. As I said at the outset in my opening statement, this is a bipartisan issue. Retirement security is something that we all agree on, and the solutions you've heard discussed today are, I believe, are a broad set of solutions And we'll be adding some more to this list as we continue to work forward. The message is that Senator Wyden and I have agreed that not only is this going to be done on a bipartisan basis, but it is going to be done on a priority basis. We're moving this to the very top part of the agenda for our committee and for our efforts here because it's so critical. And I want to again thank the witnesses for your testimony today, and I expect you'll get to help us some more as we reach out to you as we put this legislation together. Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Senator Crapo, and my colleague is speaking for me. Let me just mention 4 quick takeaways from today. First, we learned that our Savers Credit proposal, combined with a national program like Oregon Saves, could lead to a staggering number of new savers, 50 million new savers, $6.2 trillion in additional savings over the next decade. That's a big takeaway to leave the room with. Second, we learned from Mr. Graff of the Retirement Association that mega IRAs owned by mega millionaires and billionaires are largely the result of their access to investments like private equity that aren't generally available to the middle class and other savers of moderate means because these investments are limited under securities law to wealthy investors. And so I want everybody in America the chance to get ahead and to save, and the abusive use of tax incentives meant to help middle-class savers creates an economic double standard that creates a system of saving haves and have-nots. We can do better than that. We can make sure that everybody has a chance to get ahead. Finally, we learned about the importance of auto-enrolling workers in workplace savings plans. I think that was something that was touched on by a number of our experts, and we also learned that this will reduce racial disparities in retirement plan savings rates, which is especially important. And finally, we learned, because of the important questioning from Senator Cortez Mastow about the importance of multilingual retirement savings education materials, we have another opportunity to reduce racial disparities in saving. We will take those and the other important thoughts that you all have given us, use it, as Senator Crapo mentioned, on our efforts to make sure we continue our tradition of working on these issues in a bipartisan way. Members will have 7 days to submit questions for the record. For the witnesses, that means Wednesday, August 4th, by close of business. And with that, the Senate Finance Committee is closing a very productive hearing.